why monarchy is better than democracy. Representative government has been one of the core values of Western civilization. It is proudly affirmed in the history books to this day, as it is assumed to be the most advanced and superior method of ruling a nation, with anything else being ridiculed as backward and oppressive. The concept goes all the way back to classical antiquity and ancient Greece, giving rise to various republics throughout the Greek and Roman period. But these never lasted and always fell back into traditional forms of autocratic government. Now I'm referencing absolute monarchy, not constitutional monarchy. That is simply a fancy word for democracy. We're told that democracy is the most fair and egalitarian form of governance, superior to the archaic system of monarchy, which we're constantly reminded of in popular culture.
That the Senate is the people's sire, chosen from among the people to speak for the people.
I doubt many of the people eat so well as you do, Gracchus. Or have such splendid mistresses, Gaius. I think I understand my own people.
Then perhaps Caesar will be so good as to teach us, out of his own extensive experience.
After all, democracy allows for every man to have a voice and to be fairly represented, no matter his class or status, opening the door to class mobility, breaking the shackles of serfdom, and giving man what he craves most: freedom. Well, at least that's the idea. But like all good ideas, the outcome is very often not what is expected. Just because something looks good on paper, by no means proves it will work in practice. Now, why is this? Surely democracy is the pinnacle of state rule methodology and represents the best in human advancement of political science, a system that offers everyone a voice and temporary rotational rule with no permanent statesman with absolute power. How could this not work? Well, let's look at the presuppositions first. We are assuming that in a democracy, everyone in the government is honest and only working for the interests of his constituency and electorate. We assume he is working tirelessly to push legislation and policy that will benefit the average person with no preference or willingness to take any kind of incentive from a third party with special interests, i.e., a bribe. It assumes total neutrality and equality with no corruption. In other words, representative government can only work in a moral and uncorrupted society. Does anyone know of such a place? So, although it's possible, let's not be too pessimistic here. People are capable of behaving morally, and there have been places throughout history where such systems have worked, temporarily at least. This is where the wheel of revolution comes in. Like any man-made institution, it gets corrupted over time, and eventually collapses, as the prosperity brings excesses in everything from wealth to debauchery. Man's problem stems from his own pride and requires hardship to recalibrate his moral compass. Otherwise, he drifts off course into the abyss of sin, immorality, and ultimately evil, as we've seen many pagan nations devolve into degeneracy, with human sacrifice as the common denominator every time. Democracies allow for too many corruptible individuals. With so many people in government, it's too easy for corruption to find its way in and then rot from the inside. You only need a few bad apples and it spreads. There is no real accountability, as it's easy to shift the blame, spin all kinds of lies, and create what amounts to a circus of internal squabble, left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative, you name it, it's always the same. Any mistakes or blunders can be spun out of existence as distractions are created with false dichotomies and the illusion of choice when voting. Meanwhile, the unseen summit of the pyramid of power can enjoy unbridled freedom to essentially do anything without consent or accountability. In the end, democracy can only work if the population at every level behaves morally. Okay, so why is monarchy any different? Surely democracy, with all its flaws, is still better than a system that allows some unelected autocrat to impose his will on an entire population who never approved of him in the first place. Well, no. A monarch is obliged to fulfill his obligations to his people. Again, we've been conditioned through popular culture to think that a king is just some overfed, drunken fool who spends all his time indulging in worldly pleasures.
You to run my kingdom while I eat, drink, and haul my way to an early grave.
But in reality, this is far from true. Not to say that monarchs didn't take advantage of their position to enjoy the excesses of a king, but history shows that kings who neglected their responsibilities, causing hardship to their subjects, did not last long, as this would give a pretext for not only civil unrest, but other people with power, such as the barons, or as we call them today, oligarchs, to start a revolution. These were the ever-present threat to a king, and the only group that really had the capability to overthrow a monarch. So the only group who screams about oppression and being tyrannized by a king are the barons, who are usually misbehaving and require a heavy hand to keep them out of the proverbial cookie jar. The oligarchs were the vampire class who always envied the crown and would tirelessly look for ways of either co-opting or removing the king, whose principal role was to protect the serfs or the general population, depending on the era and location, from these parasites. So the idea that it was always the peasantry against the monarchy is false. The principal enemy of the people and the king were the barons, who were always looking to usurp the power of the throne, allowing free rein to loot and pillage, yet they used social justice as a means to gain support. A good example can be seen in the run-up to the English Civil War of the 1640s, as Parliament demanded more power from the crown, as they claimed they only wanted what was best for the people. But in reality, they simply wanted to enrich themselves. What is a king? Is he just some fat lazy slob sponging off the peasantry, living a life of luxury, as everyone else lives in poverty? Could be. But again, he would not last long, and dynasties are aware of their obligations and the risks they have simply for holding absolute power, let alone abusing it. So only foolish monarchs go down this path, of which there have been, of course. A king, an emperor, a czar, a kaiser, a sultan, is in fact the embodiment of a nation, or an empire, which is a collective of peoples of one or many ethnicities. Either way, the king is the father figure of a nation, and the people are his children, to whom he has a duty of care. So again, this goes back to morality. If a king upholds this and behaves accordingly, then everything else will fall into place, and you will see a functional, healthy society. We have seen true tyrants throughout history, of course, but monarchy as a system of government leads to a more stable society. You know who is in charge, whether things are going well or poorly. The responsibility lies with the king, so this can be a huge burden for a single man who cannot escape accountability and may even lose his head, which history shows can indeed happen. This cannot be said in a democracy, which is just a guise for a bunch of shady oligarchs who are answerable to no one. They operate in the shadows, exploiting the general population and plundering the wealth of the nation. As a democracy becomes more sophisticated, layers of politicians and various government officials begin stacking up in what amounts to smoke and mirrors, where the ruling class have created a completely artificial government for the purpose of distracting the population with the illusion of choice as they bicker and argue over policy. It is a classical bait-and-switch tactic. Meanwhile, business is booming for the robber barons, who have written themselves an entire book of blank checks. Given enough time, they will completely co-opt the government at every level and have full control. A Christian monarchy where the church must approve of and sanctify the monarch, meaning he must show a strong moral character, is arguably the best form of authority. This includes protecting the weak and vulnerable from the predatory class. This isn't to say that all monarchies, past and present, are good, but overall the system tends to work better and offers more stability than this so-called democracy that we keep hearing about. The majority of monarchs are very much respected and loved by their people to this day. So in conclusion, the government itself is not the problem. It is simply a committee where policy is decided. The problem is a democracy is the most corruptible form, and the easiest for the oligarchic class to commandeer, as every man has a price, especially in a morally degraded nation. So what you're left with is a permanent shadow government, invisible to everyone, yet is totalitarian. Some call it the deep state, yet many deny it even exists.
I love democracy. I love the Republic.